Hail and well met, everyone. Welcome to Geek Thyself, a podcast by a nerd for other nerds that love geeking out over random facts and esoteric trivia. My name is Heather, and I'll be your host as we journey into the wondrous land of information. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of Geek Thyself. So this week I have something a little different. One of my fellow Nerdsmith creators gave me a challenge, shall we say. I've mentioned him before on this show. His name is Will Crosswait, and he has a show on the network called Crosswords, where he breaks down some tips and tricks for playing a bard at the table, so a Scanlan-esque bard. Things you can do that'll help amp up your bard game, basically. You can find the information on our website, nerdsmith.org, if you want to check out his show as well. I definitely recommend it. It's fun to watch on YouTube. And then the challenge he gave me was at the end of his most recent episode. Apparently, he and one of his really good friends have been having a debate for several years even over whether or not Batman has superpowers. Specifically, Will is arguing in favor of Batman having superpowers because his superpowers are the fact that he has a lot of money and the fact that both of his parents died, which was sort of a motivator for everything. So he was basing this off of the pure definitions of super and power. So that's what this episode is going to be. He was expecting me just to give him a little Twitter response, but I decided that I thought this was kind of a fun enough topic that I want to do a whole episode. So, without further ado, here we go. So many of my episodes. How many times can I say so in this episode? Let's find out. Jeez. But anyway, like a lot of my episodes, I don't want to claim that I am an expert in Batman, because I am not. I really like Batman. He's actually my favorite DC hero. Well, him and Catwoman. Who's an anti-hero, villain, whatever. You know, there's so many different sidelines. Some of them, she's not evil. I like her too, because cats. Yeah, you know. But anyway, so for Batman, I've read a few of the comics, but not all of them. I'm primarily going to be citing either information that I've double-checked online. I'm not going to lie, I'm using the wiki, because that's an easy source for me to look up. I'm also going off of my knowledge from the Batman movies, and I mean all the Batman movies. I've seen the old Adam West ones. I've seen all of the ones they made in the 80s and 90s, including some of the bad ones. Unfortunately, I have those in my memory also. And then also the new ones with Christian Bale. I'm also going to be looking at the cartoon. When I was a kid, back in the 90s and somewhat early 2000s, but mostly in the 90s, there was a really popular Batman cartoon show, which also followed the comics fairly well. Some of the plot lines obviously get tweaked a little because it's a cartoon show, so they're changing it for kids, but in general, they were pretty similar. So those are the things I'm primarily using for this in going forward, all the information I'm using. So starting off with, does Batman even have superpowers? I'm going to go into the definition of super and superpowers. The argument that Batman has superpowers, again, I said it earlier, but Will's main argument was that purely off the definitions of super and power, Bruce Wayne has those things. Now, if you look at the definition of super, according to the Merriam-Webster Dictionary online, there are three main definitions for super. One is of high grade or quality, one is very large or powerful, and the third main definition is exhibiting the characteristics of its type to an extreme or excessive degree. So if you look at those three definitions, and then look at some of the things Bruce Wayne has, such as his money, then technically that is a super ability that he has. He has high grade or quality. He has a lot of money, so he has a lot of high grade and quality items. Very large or powerful. Bruce Wayne, his industry, the Wayne Industries, is supposed to be a very powerful company with a lot of money, a lot of influence. It's very large, and it has a global span. And apparently Mowgli thinks I should be talking about Catwoman instead. But moving on. So looking at that first definition of super, technically he has that. And then also the third definition of super, exhibiting the characteristics of its type to an extreme or excessive degree. I think we can all agree that Bruce Wayne was ridiculously rich. The amount of money he had, the amount of things he's done. I mean, in all the comics, the amount of things he's funded, the expensive trips, the fancy equipment, the incredible secrecy he has to use, and how many people he probably has to pay off to create some of this stuff, or at least help him create some of this stuff. He's gotta have an extreme or excessive amount of money. So, per that definition, just looking at the word super, I would agree that he has a super ability, which is his excessive income, his huge amount of money. Along those same lines, if you look at the definitions of super, having the excessive ability or whatever, you could also potentially argue that some of his physical abilities could be included into that. Because even though he doesn't have what people stereotypically consider a superpower, he does have an almost superhuman physicality. He has trained himself so much, especially if you look at the comics and the cartoons, some of the physical feats that he does. I mean, let's face it, the average person, you and me, I can't leap off a roof and survive, even with that, the cape thing he uses so he doesn't fall. And I can't punch gigantic villains through a wall or far away from me across the room. Now, granted, it's sensationalized because it's a cartoon, but even so, if you look at it, some of the things they have him accomplish in the comics, in the movies, in the books, are almost superhuman in terms of his physical ability. He obviously, at least per the main storylines, has not been mutated or anything. They've done so many offshoots in so many different directions that I'm not going to say he never has, because I'm not sure that that's the case. But the general storylines, he's your everyday average human, except that he has used his super ability of money to fund training himself and becoming extremely capable physically. All his martial arts, all of that kind of thing. He's also incredibly intelligent, and in the DC universe is basically the Marvel, he's basically DC's version of Iron Man, Tony Stark, where they're both really rich, they're both really smart, they both have a lot of power because they're so rich, and they both use that ability to then create mechanical things and gadgets that help them and make them even more powerful. So using the money and as a superpower argument, you could potentially make that argument simply because of all the things he accomplishes with his money. It's not technically, it's not like he got bitten by a radioactive spider like Spider-Man and is, bouncing off of walls with his own body ability. But nonetheless, he's used his money to create himself an almost superhuman ability to fight villains, which technically could be considered a superpower. Moving on, if you look at the definition of power, the definition of power by Merriam-Webster, there's honestly 6 or 7 different definitions. Some of them have to do with baseball terminology, so obviously that doesn't apply here. The one I'm looking at specifically in terms of this discussion is, if you go to merriam-webster.com, you can look them up yourself, just, look up power. But the third definition is physical might, mental or moral efficacy, and political control or influence. So if you look at that definition, physical might, he definitely has physical might, and in fact, his money has helped him with that. Mental or moral efficacy. I think we could all agree that even though his moral compass does not always line up with everyone's, he definitely has one. And he's also very mentally smart, so that's a power he has as well. Political control or influence. Again, this goes back to the money. If you have enough money, as much as I wish it wasn't the case, if you have enough money, you have a better chance of influencing politics and exerting control or influence over society, because that's just the way it is. And then Another definition of power, which is actually the sixth one on Merriam-Webster, is a source or means of supplying energy. Also, like motivation. So, if you look at that definition of power, a source or means of supplying energy, then technically the death of his parents when he was a child in front of him is what has supplied his energy as a superhero. So by that definition, you could argue that his parents dying gave him a sort of superpower in that he's so focused, he's so on it, he is so incredibly wanting to deal with that issue, and the source of his energy to continue doing so is partly based off of his parents dying in front of him. Granted, obviously, these are all slight stretches from what the technical, normal consideration of a superpower definition is, but if you just look at the definitions of the two words themselves, there are some correlations. Another thing, too, the first definition of power, again, on the Merriam-Webster dictionary site, is the ability to act or produce an effect. And another part of that is capacity for being acted upon or undergoing an effect. You could definitely argue that his parents' death produced an effect. It definitely had the ability to produce an effect. It also gave him the capacity to act upon that or to undergo an effect and become who he is, become Batman. Obviously, no one wants to see their parents die in front of them, but we all know that happens for Batman, and so he uses that energy to then turn himself into the Caped Crusader that we all know from the comics and the movies and the cartoons and everything. Okay, and moving on with the definition portion of this episode. If you look at the definition for superpower, not the way we interpret it for comics, not the way it gets used in cartoons and things like that, but just purely what is the dictionary definition of superpower. Merriam-Webster defines superpower. The number one definition is excessive or superior power. So that means that according to, again, the Merriam-Webster dictionary definition, which is one that I think most people refer back to, the definition of superpower is excessive or superior power. So that means the definition of superpower is excessive or superior source or means of supplying energy, or it could also be excessive or superior physical might, excessive or superior mental or moral efficacy, excessive or superior political control or influence, and excessive or superior ability to act or produce an effect. So purely based off the definitions of those words of super, power, and even superpower, according to everyone's most often used dictionary, the Merriam-Webster dictionary, technically, Batman has superpowers. Okay, everyone. Well, I hope you are enjoying this episode. It's definitely a little different than some of my other ones because this time someone submitted a question to me. Obviously, if you guys want to have your questions answered, I'd be happy to hear them and look at reviewing them and answering them for you here on the show. If you want to submit a question, you can find me on Twitter at amethyst_magic, and that's magic with a CK. You can also find me quite often on the Nerdsmith Discord server. You can find the link on our website, nerdsmith.org, and if you @ me, so @ Heather, or put something in the Geek Thyself chat, I will see it and be able to answer the question for you at that point. Hopefully. I'll try. I always try. And I definitely recommend going to the website, nerdsmith.org, and checking out some of the other shows, even if you don't want to ask me a question necessarily. Although, why not? I mean, I think I'm entertaining enough. I hope so, because you guys are still listening to me, in theory. So anyway, check out Geek Thyself on the website, nerdsmith.org. You can also submit your questions to my Twitter at amethyst_magic with a CK. And yeah, with that, let's get back to this week's very interesting analysis topic. Okay, so we've established that purely from a just looking at the word definitions, pedantic reading of what a superpower is, Batman has them. So honestly, I'm not gonna lie, I'm a little bit pedantic when it comes to information. For anyone who doesn't know what that means, it basically means, well, pedantic is an adjective. It's used to describe someone who tends to like to emphasize the minutia, the really tiny details in the presentation or use of knowledge. And that is something you can look up on Merriam-Webster. If anyone wants to, it's pedantic, Pedantic. So I do this, and I know I do this. I'm a little nitpicky about the details. I love details. It's one of the things that works well with this show, actually. But because of that, for me, just looking at the true meanings of the words, I actually agree with Will. And you guys are welcome to disagree with me, because I know that Batman's abilities are not technically a traditional superpower the way people think of them. But based off the definitions of the words and how many things he's able to do, I actually agree. I think that Batman does have superpowers. I'm not entirely sure I agree with the two Will picked out, but I agree with at least one of them. So the first one that Will picked out in his little promo for me about answering this question for him was that his superpower is money. This one I definitely agree with. I agree that Bruce Wayne, aka Batman, aka the Caped Crusader, aka the Dark Knight, all those things, whatever term you want to use for him, he is loaded. He has tons of money. And this largesse of money has allowed him to then do a lot of things that you and I can't. Like, honestly, if I could sit at home all day with tons of money coming in, I mean, granted, you do see him working in the show sometimes and in the comics sometimes, but more often than not, we're only seeing his Batman activities in those. We see a little bit of the other side. But if I had that kind of money where I could hire people to train me for hours a week or hours a day how to punch, how to kick, how to do martial arts. I actually have some martial arts training, and I know for a fact that I am nowhere near the level of martial arts ability that Batman is supposed to have. Nowhere near it. The closest person I know that comes even slightly close to that would probably be my former martial arts instructor. And he is someone that I would argue is way above and beyond your average martial artist. He has, well, I don't know. I'd have to look up whether or not he still holds them. But I know back in 2008, he had 2 different world record holdings in the Guinness Book of World Records. One was for the fastest martial arts punches, and he hit 43.3 miles an hour with his punch. The other one he held was most martial arts punches in a minute, and he had 713 punches in a minute. And he is an incredible martial artist. His name is John Ozuna. Shout out to all my KO, Kung Fu, Karate people out there. I don't know that any of you are listening, but if you happen to, hi! And he's incredible. And that's an incredibly high level of martial arts ability that's ridiculous. The average person cannot do this. I mean, a 43.3 mile an hour punch. That's insane. So, to my way of thinking, Batman has to be on that kind of a level. And that requires years and years of training. It requires honing your skills, focusing your body on those abilities, and giving yourself an almost superhuman martial arts ability. So I would argue that his money allowed him to do this for Batman. Batman's money, all of Bruce Wayne's money from Wayne Industries, allowed him to be able to do this. Also, his money allowed him to be able to create all of the gadgets and gizmos that he uses, his batarangs, his Batmobile, the Batcave, which is always outfitted really fancily with the newest technology, like all of these things that he only has because he has so much money. So I would argue that definitely money could be considered one of his superpowers. I would actually also argue that his intelligence is one of his superpowers. Not a true superpower, again, in the purest definition of what most people think of as a superpower, but if you think about it, the intuition and the analysis that he has to do, the intelligence that he uses to create some of his gadgets, his unique Batman equipment. Those are things which, depending on which iteration of the Batman storyline you're looking at, he created. I know in the newest movies with Christian Bale and The Dark Knight, he's got that person who's helping him make everything. I can't remember his name right now in the movies, but you know who I'm talking about. Morgan Freeman played him and did a great job of creating all of these cool things for him to use. Well, at least from what I recall, in the old cartoons and in the comics, Batman did more of it himself. He probably hired out bits and pieces of it, secretly, without telling anybody what it's for. One part from China, one part from Japan, one part from Russia, you know what I mean? Like, he's got the money to do that. But at the end of the day, he's the one that put it all together. Somewhat Tony Stark-esque in that, where he's the one that put it together. So he's definitely supposed to be very intelligent, which I think also helps. Calling it a superpower, honestly, may be pushing it. I think he's just a really smart guy. Not necessarily at, like, Dr. Reed from the Fantastic Four or Tony Stark level quite, but very intelligent, and I think that helps. His physical abilities in general, I would argue, are almost superhuman, as I mentioned earlier, and I do think that's based off his money. But that's something that could be considered a superpower, depending on how you look at it. I mean, there are old-school superheroes whose only ability is that they're strong. That's it. Like, they weren't crazy powerful, they weren't mutants, they were just really strong, and they punched things. So, I mean, those are really old-school comics, really old school. But those existed. And so, thinking of it that way, I would say that that's a physical super ability that he has. The other one, Will's argument about his parents dying in front of him being a superpower. I'm a little on the fence about that particular one for two reasons. One is because technically it's an event that happened to him and not something he personally has as an ability. So calling it a superpower, I'm a little on the fence. The other reason is because I think it's more accurate to call it his motivation. Now, one of the definitions did specifically mention that the definition of power could be a source of energy. So I do agree that Batman gets some of his power from his parents dying in front of him. That I don't argue at all. Seeing his parents die in front of him gave him so much trauma that he turned into a positive effect. He turned the emotional trauma, the anguish, the pain into his ability to then create Batman. He turned it into his focus, his drive. And he does have almost a superhuman drive when it comes to going after things. I mean, honestly, if you think about it, if you were incredibly rich, had a Playboy reputation, had a huge company at your beck and call, I mean, if you think about it, I don't know that most people would go the way he went. I don't think most people would be like, I'm going to create an alter ego and go fight people. That doesn't seem like something most of us would think of doing. Some of us maybe, but not all of us. And so I do think to a certain degree you could argue that his parents being dead, his parents dying in front of him, granted him a superpower in that it granted him superhuman focus on cleaning up the streets of Gotham and making the world a better place. I would be willing to argue that point to an extent. But I definitely would agree that depending on the way you look at it and purely off the definitions of the words, his money is totally a superpower. Because he's got all of that money, which then led to other things that only someone with that kind of money could achieve. So his physical abilities, all of his technology that he has access to, which is not technically a superpower, but it's definitely access to something that gives him almost superpower abilities. That combination only exists because he has so much money. And actually, I guess technically, if you go back a couple steps, the only reason he has that much money and has access to so much money, no questions asked, is because his parents died. So I guess looking at it that way, you could say that his parents dying was a superpower. Between the combination of it giving him an almost superhuman drive and it then leading to his ability of having so much money. Technically, yeah. And again, all of these are going purely off the definitions of the words. I already admitted I'm one of those people that likes to look at the definition of the word and use that to make my decisions. I like the little details and the minutia and the exact definitions. I like those things. That's one of the reasons why this show exists. So if you're not one of those people, if you disagree with me, that's fine. Everyone's entitled to their opinion. I think this is an interesting argument. I think it's an interesting discussion to have with your friends. I think it would also give you good insight into how does my friend think about things? Because even if you don't know all the details of the different Batman storylines, which I definitely don't. There's so many different ones. There's even 2 where he has kids, one with Catwoman and one with Ra's al Ghul's daughter, whose name I just forgot. But either way, like, there's tons of storylines, tons of different variations. There's different universes for Marvel and DC, so things change all the time. But even if you don't know all that information, most people, the average person, has heard of Batman and knows at least the basics of his story, being that he's super rich, he's got an alter ego, aka Bruce Wayne, and his parents died in front of him. Those are things that most people know just because the movies have been so popular. It's a part of pop culture. So I think this would be an interesting topic to discuss with your friends, and I would definitely recommend it. I think it'd be an interesting way to liven up a party, especially if you're talking about like a bunch of nerdy people like me. I'm not gonna lie, I'm total nerd, total geek, whatever term you want to use, I probably fit it. And so for me, this kind of a discussion at a party, I would be totally enthralled. I would love it. 'Cause I'm a dork. Yeah, that's just me. But, I think if your friends are along those same lines, this might be a really interesting topic. You could definitely get a better feel, too, for, are my friends more traditional? Do they really just believe that a superpower has to be some sort of superpower, like a mutation, or like Superman's ability to fly? Does it have to be something like that? Or can it be more extrapolated out based off of the definitions of the words? That might be an interesting thing to test out. You know, drop this question at one of your friend group get-togethers and figure out how the different people in your life think about these things. I didn't mean to get all psychology based on it, but that's true. You could do that and look at it, and I think it'd be fun. And so I want to thank Will for submitting this question, because I definitely thought it was an interesting one. Again, I mentioned it once or twice already, but if you have a question, if it's something like this, for instance, which I had a lot of fun doing, definitely would love to do it again. If you have a question, you can submit it to my Twitter at amethyst_magic, and that's magic with a CK. Or you can go to the Nerdsmith Discord server, which you can find a link to at nerdsmith.org. We've got our little social media bars up at the top. You know, you just click on the link and it'll take you right there. But if you go there and post a question in the Geek Thyself server, it's pretty empty right now, not gonna lie, but it's a fairly new show, so, you know, whatever. But I look at it pretty regularly, so if you submit a question there, you know, I'll look at it and look at answering it, and hopefully have just as much fun answering it as I did this one. So again, Will, thank you so much. Don't forget to check out Will Crosswait on his show Crosswords on YouTube. You can find it on our website, nerdsmith.org. And with that, I'm going to call this good, and I'll see you guys next week. Well, talk to you guys next week. I think we can all agree it'd be a little creepy if I could see you, considering this is a podcast. That would be strange. But yeah, talk to you later. Please remember to check out the other wonderful podcasts and productions here at nerdsmith.org. I'll be back next week with a new and interesting topic, and until then, don't forget to geek thyself.
Hello, fans of Critical Role. Do you mean to make your music more melodious? Do you seek to sing like Scanlan Shorthalt? Well, look no further than Crosswords, a new video series from the creator of the Critical Role Hamilton mashup album. And also this song. Crosswords with Will Crosswait. Advice and analysis for the musician at the gaming table. Available on nerdsmith.org or wherever you watch your YouTube videos. YouTube, right? Probably YouTube.
Welcome to the Birchfield Institute. My name is Ren. How can I help you? Oh, new faces. Hi. You come looking for stories? Well, this place is nothing if not full of them. Stick around. I've got some of the best.
Threads in the Veil, an audio drama series on nerdsmith.org or wherever you get your podcasts.